Chapter 1. The Mansion at the End of the Dream. Silas Grey had always believed in one thing: acquisition. Not the cold, distant kind of ownership whispered about in back rooms or inked into corporate contracts. No, Silas wanted to possess things, spaces, people, reputations. And when the letter arrived, thick, cream-colored parchment sealed in wax, informing him that he was now the sole inheritor of an estate in West Egg, he saw more than just property. He saw a legacy, a revival, a monument to ambition. He arrived just before dusk, the sky bruised violet, the air stinking of salt and old fire. The mansion loomed against the waterline like a corpse reclining after a lavish party. Time had warped it, the angles bent wrong, the balconies sagged, and yet it breathed with something alive. Ivy writhed up the stone like green veins. Shutters banged softly against the windless air, and the windows wept condensation that shimmered faintly green. The gate, once wrought iron shaped into curling roses, now stood rusted and jagged, resembling teeth. As he passed through, the padlock crumbled like wet sugar in his hand. The foyer greeted him not with dust, but with scent. Sweet rot, like fruit left too long in the sun. The grand chandelier above, a monstrous crystal hydra, dripped slow beads of red sap that struck the marble with wet ticks, like a heartbeat. Each drop left a faint hiss, like flesh against fire. The walls pulsed. Not metaphorically. The wallpaper, a once elegant damask of gold and cream, seemed to inhale, puffing out, as if the plaster lungs beneath were exhaling long-held breath. Every so often it spasmed. Silas touched it once and recoiled. It was warm. The house had been untouched for decades, and yet the mirrors gleamed. The liquor cabinet was full. The grand piano in the music room played, very softly, the final notes of a song Silas couldn't name, yet it chilled him. The notes unresolved, hanging in the air like a warning. He set up camp in the master bedroom, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out to the bay. Moonlight spilled in like milk gone sour. That first night the bed moaned beneath him like it resented his weight. He slept, if it could be called that, to the sound of something crawling in the walls. The days bled into each other as Silas threw himself into the restoration. He brought in craftsmen and decorators, all paid handsomely. Some stayed a few hours, some left mid-shift without collecting their wages. One, a young electrician named Marty, walked into the dining hall and didn't come out for 3 hours. When Silas finally found him, the man was on his knees, eyes rolled back, babbling about the dripping moon and the garden that screams beneath the soil. He tore out his own tongue with pliers in the driveway, laughing until he choked on blood. After that, Silas did the work himself. The more he fixed, the more the house revealed. A second basement hidden behind the wine cellar, filled with tattered suits and perfume bottles labeled only Daisy. A dumbwaiter that went down farther than any floor he'd found. A ballroom behind a mirror. The walls in there were covered in black feathers, and in the center stood a statue of a man split down the middle, half dashing gentleman, half rotting cadaver. Every night, fog rolled in thick and sour off the bay. Through it, Silas saw lights, not from ships or homes, but from within the gardens. Lanterns strung in rows. Shadows danced beneath them, couples in flowing gowns and tuxedos, spinning to music he could not hear. Their faces were blank slates, smooth, featureless. One night, drawn by the ghostly celebration, Silas stepped out onto the lawn. As soon as he crossed the threshold of the veranda, the air changed. It thickened. The fog clung to his suit like skin, and the dancers turned to him in unison as if pulled by strings. They didn't move. They only stared. Then came the voice. It was not spoken aloud. It burrowed directly into his mind. each syllable jagged and wet like chewing glass. Dream it, want it, bleed for it. The words echoed through the bones of the house. In the library, books flew open and their pages turned black. In the parlor, a portrait of a smiling man melted, revealing a snarling skull beneath. The chandeliers hissed as their red sap became fire, burning with no smoke. Silas fled back inside. As he slammed the doors, the dancing resumed outside, like a gramophone needle dropped back on an eternal, cursed record. In the mornings, nothing made sense. The grass was undisturbed, the lights gone. But his eyes, they'd changed. Bloodshot, hungry. Something had looked back at him from the fog. In the following days, he noticed changes in himself. The ambition that had once lived in his mind now pulsed in his gut like a tumor. He craved more than success. He craved adoration. His skin crawled when he wasn't being watched. He began rehearsing speeches in the mirrors, weeping with joy at his imagined applause. And every time he passed by the drawing room, he saw them through the glass. Faceless guests, dancing, waiting. Chapter 2. The Green Light Grows. Silas Grey's ascent into the upper echelons of modern wealth was not gradual. It detonated. It began one morning with a deal he never remembered making. A biotech firm, Nova Helix, credited him as a major investor, their stocks multiplying tenfold overnight after a breakthrough in synthetic longevity. His name appeared in Forbes under visionaries who knew before the market. He hadn't touched his portfolio in weeks, yet his net worth doubled, then tripled. Emails flooded in from media agencies, political donors, venture capitalists. Everyone wanted Silas. They spoke of him with reverence, as though he were a prophet of prosperity. Wall Street analysts couldn't explain it. Everything he touched turned to gold. And yet, while his name was ascending, his body was dissolving. He hardly noticed. In fact, he smiled more, even as his gums bled every time he bit into food. Even as hair began falling out in elegant little curls onto his pillow. Even as his fingernails thickened, yellowed, and began curling inward like claws. He wore tailored suits over trembling skin. In mirrors he looked brighter, slicker, like a wax model version of himself melting at the edges. The mansion, of course, rejoiced. Its halls grew warmer. The chandelier's sap glowed faintly green now, illuminating the foyer with an alien sheen. The walls no longer pulsed. They throbbed. The house was eating, swallowing Silas's ambition whole and asking for seconds. One night, while exploring the West Wing, an area he'd never managed to keep workers inside for longer than 20 minutes, he discovered a door that hadn't existed the day before. It was flesh-colored, organic. Its edges seemed to twitch like gills. At its center was a brass handle shaped like a staring eye. He opened it without hesitation. Inside was a circular chamber, windowless, thick with incense and rot. The walls were covered in faded murals, gold-leaf nightmares of men in tuxedos, flayed open, their chests stuffed with diamonds, their eyes sewn shut with stock ticker tape. In the center of the room stood a pedestal carved from bleached bone. Upon it, a rotting tuxedo, crawling with iridescent beetles that hissed but did not move. Next to it, a glass egg, opalescent and shifting colors like an oil slick. And hovering above both, suspended in midair like a wound torn into reality, a glowing green light. It was not a light, not truly. It was a consciousness. When Silas looked into it, time vanished. His breath halted. He was staring into something ancient, older than America, older than want itself, and yet it knew America. It wore its skin. Within the light, he saw a black ocean. Its waves made no sound. The water was viscous, like molten tar. Floating beneath its surface were bodies, hundreds, thousands, bloated dreamers in tuxedos and flappered dresses, clawing upward, mouths wide in silent screams, their eyes two words etched in abyssal ink. For more and more. One of them looked exactly like Silas. Another looked like Gatsby. Another, like Abraham Lincoln, his face bloated with debt and deceit. Another, God help him, looked like his dead wife, Lydia. He snapped back to the room, gasping, tears streaming down his face, his tongue tasting of copper and envy. The green light pulsed softly, as if satisfied. From that moment forward, reality began to unravel. It started with time. At dinner, Silas sat down to roast a duck, and when he blinked, the duck was raw, bloody feathers sticking to his fork. Blinked again, he was at lunch. Again, he was 5 years old, chewing chalk in his childhood classroom. A woman screamed in the distance. He blinked again. Back at dinner. Next, the staff. He had hired new help, desperate to reclaim some order in the house. But the servants whispered in languages he'd never heard. Their eyes were too bright, too wet. One maid hummed all day long, the same note, off-key and without pause, even in sleep. Another began carving phrases into the walls with her fingernails. The dream eats. The dream hungers. One night, Silas entered the dining room to find them all seated at the table, perfectly still, their mouths sewn shut with gold thread. Each plate was empty, save for a napkin on which was scrawled, in blood, "We fed it, now it feeds us." Then Lydia returned. She appeared at the far end of the table during a fog-thick midnight. She wore the same dress she'd died in, a blue silk thing, torn down the middle by the car crash that caved in her ribs. Her smile was broken, her eyes full of tears that didn't fall. "Silas," she whispered, voice a brittle thing, "you brought it back. Why?" He vomited. It came up as gold coins and fingernails. He collapsed against the wall, shrieking, tearing at his skin until he peeled away something underneath. A different face, smoother, hungrier. As the days bled together, he began to realize. The American dream was not an idea. It was not hope or freedom or prosperity. It was a parasite. It had always lived in the minds of men, feeding on their yearning, their sweat, their delusions. But now, through him, it had taken form. It lived in the mansion, it lived in the green light, it lived in the want. And it was growing. The walls began to whisper, not just to Silas, but to everyone who entered. Guests came for brunch and never left. The bay behind the mansion became dark, oil-thick, dotted with the occasional ripple as if something large stirred beneath the surface. The mansion's architecture twisted, new hallways, extra doors, ceilings that never stopped rising, stairs that descended forever. Silas sat in his green-lit room, nightly now, whispering to the egg, staring into the light, smiling as his teeth blackened and fell out one by one. His hands bled from clawing at the walls. His sleep was filled with dreams of towers built from bones and champagne fountains flowing with bile. And through it all, the light whispered to him in a voice made of every politician, every tycoon, every dead poet and sweatshop child and embezzler. Build, dream, climb, bleed. There is no top. There is only us. Chapter 3. Consumption. The money no longer mattered. It came in daily, in wild, screaming torrents, wires from Swiss banks he'd never contacted, anonymous crypto wallets vomiting coins into his name, stock options from companies he'd never heard of but now somehow owned, and Silas Grey did not care. It passed through his hands like sand in a hurricane, meaningless, gritty, and impossible to hold. The mansion pulsed with it. Gold veins ruptured through the walls, bleeding molten wealth into the cracks. Coins oozed from the faucets like infected pus. Chandeliers shivered above him, heavy with dripping dollar bills that rotted to green sludge before they could be spent. He tried once to donate it, to give it all away. He sent billions to an orphanage in Haiti. The next morning, the children were gone. The orphanage was a crater of ash and broken dolls. A single note was nailed to the gates, written in burned American flag cloth. The dream does not share. Outside the mansion, the town of West Egg decayed in silence. What once was opulent had curdled into parody. Mansions collapsed under the weight of their own hunger, driveways paved in bones instead of bricks. People wore clothes stitched from stock certificates and wept blood when they couldn't access their accounts. Friends stopped returning calls. Those who dared visit Silas left with shaking hands and thousand-yard stares. His former business partner, Caleb Vaughn, wandered onto his estate wearing nothing but his Harvard-class ring and a noose. He sat on the marble steps, smiling. "Silas," he whispered, "it's inside the dividends. Every decimal point is a whisper. Every comma, a mouth." His eyes caught fire without a match. His body slumped over, still grinning, teeth scorched black. Another day, Silas found his old college mentor, Professor Ellison, dancing alone on the lawn at midnight. Naked. Eyes sewn shut with golden thread. He murmured a lullaby in reverse until his throat gave out and he choked on his own shredded vocal cords. The coroner didn't even show. No one came anymore. And still, the green light grew. It no longer hovered. It consumed. The meditation chamber transformed into a sanctum, walls stretched and reshaped by a hunger not of this world. Now it pulsed with tendrils, long wet things of gold-veined flesh, slithering from the center of the green gate like the arms of a hungry god. At night they spread. Silas watched them crawl through the mansion, wrapping around chandeliers, entwining themselves in bookshelves, creeping into the mouths of sleeping servants. Anything they touched was devoured, but not destroyed, transformed. Chairs pulsed with heartbeats. Mirrors reflected not images but wants. Children unborn, spouses unfaithful, fortunes unearned. He tried to resist once, tried to bar the sanctum's door, but the tendrils seeped through the cracks, and the walls screamed until he begged for forgiveness. In desperation, Silas contacted the one person he remembered still whispering truth when the world had already gone mad. Harold Whitmore, a half-mad scholar of esoterica, last seen warning senators that ambition had a name. Whitmore arrived ragged and soaked in his own ink-stained sweat. His eyes darted like flies. "This house is the altar," he hissed, pacing before the fireplace, spreading ancient vellum scrolls and brittle tomes across the floor. The dreamer came through when Gatsby opened the wound. He wanted the dream too much. It took his face and wore it like a flag. He pointed at an illustration in a book whose text slithered when stared at directly. It showed a vast being with no shape, only hunger, floating above a world of men made of paper and debt, reaching down with hands of light. The dreamer doesn't want your success. It is your success. Every skyscraper is its rib. Every lottery ticket its tongue. You built it, you feed it. "What do I do?" Silas asked, his voice hoarse, cracking like a tombstone. Whitmore's lips split into a grimace. "You confront the gate, you speak its true name, and you vomit the dream out of yourself. But if you fail—" He trailed off, then bit off his own tongue and set himself on fire. He screamed until he couldn't, hands raised in mocking triumph. So Silas returned to the sanctum. The green light had become a portal now, no longer a glow but a wound in the air, a hole of infinite emerald depth, yawning open and whispering in every tongue that ever prayed to gold. The tendrils welcomed him, wrapping his legs, arms, shoulders, caressing. He stepped forward, and he spoke. Words poured from his lips without meaning but full of weight. Memories bled from his nose, childhood friends he forgot he ever had. His teeth cracked, his tongue swelled. Then he fell to his knees and vomited. It came in gouts, black ink, thick and crawling with letters, ticker symbols, hashtags. It splattered across the floor and slithered away, squealing like newborn rats. He wept as he whispered, "We were all him, all Gatsby, all wanting, all fools." And the gate laughed. Not a sound, but a vibration in his bones, a pressure in his skull, a tremor in the world. The green light pulsed once, twice, and then it opened wide. Chapter 4. The Tragedy Engine. The mansion was no longer a house. It had become a beast, a monstrous cathedral of aspiration and decay. The walls no longer held paint or paper. They pulsed with veins. They sweated. The floors breathed. Wood warped into cartilage. Door frames wept marrow. The ceilings sagged with the weight of dreams embalmed in flesh. Staircases twisted like serpents, rearranging themselves mid-step. One wrong turn, and you might walk into your own childhood bedroom, except your mother's corpse sat on the bed, sewing dollar bills into her gums, her eyes burned out and replaced with blinking green lights. The mirrors were worst of all. They no longer reflected the present. Instead, they showed endings, gunshots at desks, wrists in tubs, bodies twitching beneath gold-plated nooses. Silas saw his own death 1,000 different ways, all of them poetic, all of them wrapped in luxury. A suicide note carved into platinum, a bathtub of melted stock options, a final breath exhaled over caviar and blood. He looked away, but the mirror kept watching. The jazz never stopped. It poured from the walls, from the cracks in the floorboards, from the mouths of the paintings, tinny, cheerful, endlessly looping, horns blaring like car horns before a crash, piano notes that skipped, stuck, and melted. Voices without lips sang to him, "Oh, you silly boy, you dreamt too high. Now kiss the sky, before you die." The wallpaper now danced, literally. Faces bulged through it, screaming in silence as if the walls were a thin membrane holding in 1,000 howling failures. Sometimes they broke through. A hand would burst from the plaster, clutching at Silas's ankle or throat before retreating again, whimpering, apologizing. "Let me try again," one sobbed, blood pouring from its ears. "I almost made it. I was almost enough." Silas' body was the last to betray him. He woke one morning to find his sheets soaked, not with sweat, but with champagne. His eyes leaked it. Thin streams of golden fizz trickled from his tear ducts, stinging as they dripped down onto skin that no longer seemed to belong to him. His flesh had turned reflective. When he moved, ticker tape ran across his chest. NASDAQ figures, GDP reports, hashtags. His skin glittered with corporate slogans and IPO announcements. Every time he blinked, the logos changed. He could hear his bones cracking when he walked, like the snapping of distant camera shutters. Even his breath was wrong. Sweet, sour, like rotting fruit at a stockbroker's funeral. Silas was becoming the mansion's message, a billboard of want, the face of the dream. Then he knew what had to come next. The descent began in the ballroom. At the center of the parquet floor, a great spiral had been carved overnight, swirling inward like a whirlpool of wood and blood. The chandelier had fused into the ceiling, pulsing like a giant glass heart. Music swelled, not from instruments, but from the sobbing of the walls, tuned and distorted into song. He stepped into the spiral, barefoot. The wood was warm, wet. It gulped around his feet like a throat, and he sank. He fell for what could have been minutes or millennia. Colors bled past him, platinum, emerald, oil-slick black. He saw skyscrapers built from teeth, rivers of unpaid invoices, skies where gods wore dollar signs as halos. And then he landed. The dream dimension stretched out before him like a hellscape masquerading as a gala. An endless 1920s party, frozen in its climax. Golden columns soared into nothing. Chandeliers spun too fast, flinging crystal like shrapnel. Tables bent under the weight of rotted oysters, maggot-filled caviar, and bottles of champagne that screamed when opened. And the guests, they danced. They danced forever. Flapper girls twirled with rotting jaws unhinged, their skin melting like candle wax, fingernails snapped to claws. Men in tuxedos grinned with gums stripped of teeth, their faces collapsing under the weight of eternal failure. Eyes dripped from sockets, limbs twisted into grotesque angles. They bled confetti. "Welcome to the tragedy engine," a voice whispered, soft as silk, heavy as debt. Silas turned, and there he stood, the true Gatsby, or what was left of him. His tuxedo hung in burnt tatters, fused to charred flesh. His face was a ruin of elegance, cheekbones exposed, lips stitched into a permanent smile, one eye glowing green, the other a cavern of black fire. His hands were dipped in gold, frozen mid-set. Smoke curled from the seams of his skin, and he moved like memory, sliding, graceful, broken. "You're late," Gatsby said, voice dry and ancient. But not too late. Silas tried to speak, but bile rose in his throat. Champagne bubbled from his mouth instead. "Hi me," he rasped finally. "Why now?" Gatsby stepped forward, and the guests parted around him like roaches fleeing light. The dream always needs a face, a symbol, a story, or all just avatars, shells that want too much. He grinned wider. His teeth were coins. "I was the first who wanted to, well. I'd bled for the party, so the party bled for me." Silas stumbled back. "I don't want it anymore." Gatsby's laughter was a slow clapping of distant stock markets collapsing. "You don't get to want, you're the dream now." Tendrils of gold slithered up Silas's legs. He screamed as his spine cracked, folding him into a new posture, upright, elegant, welcoming. His face stretched, sculpted by invisible hands, cheekbones chiseled to perfection, eyes turned liquid emerald. The guests applauded. The music swelled, and the green light pulsed at the center of the ballroom, bathing everything in its promise. Chapter 5. The Last Toast. By the time Silas Grey returned from the dream dimension, the world above had already begun to unravel. New York was a carcass in a tuxedo, glittering and rotting all at once. The skyline had changed, buildings bent toward the mansion like supplicants praying to a new god. Skyscrapers wept liquid gold, glass panes cracked with the pressure of whispered promises and broken dreams. Entire neighborhoods collapsed under the weight of their own ambition, designer stores swallowing customers whole, stock tickers running across the sky like divine scripture. Helicopters hung frozen mid-air, wrapped in golden tendrils that pulsed with hunger. The Hudson River flowed backward now, thick with ink and bone, carrying yachts filled with laughing skeletons dressed in furs. And through it all, from sea to shimmering sea, the green light pulsed, a beacon of madness, a lighthouse guiding humanity into the teeth of its own hunger. The dream had awakened fully. Silas staggered through the mansion's now-breathing halls, flesh barely his own, consciousness threaded with the voices of the consumed. He was no longer just Silas. He He was the host, the herald, the husk. Yet deep within, something human still kicked against the walls of the cathedral he'd become. And that part of him knew there had to be an end. So he planned a final party. The invitations were sent in screams, carried on winds that smelled of gasoline and perfume. No paper, no postage, just whispers in the dark, and the cursed weight of guilt dragging old sins back home. They came, those he'd broken, those he'd bled. The mansion opened its doors to them like a wound, swallowing executives, artists, old lovers, ruined rivals, faces pale, eyes glazed with remorse and suspicion. Some wore masks, others didn't bother. It was the best way to bury. Caleb's widow came in a dress made of eviction notices. His former assistant arrived barefoot, trailing strands of her own hair behind her like a veil. Even Lydia returned, no longer spectral but solid, whole, her spine crooked from death, her smile stitched shut. None of them spoke. The music began instead. It was a party for the damned. Jazz spilled from gramophones shaped like screaming mouths. The food was served on silver platters that bled. Hors d'oeuvres wept gravy from empty eye sockets. The champagne was warm and full of teeth. Silas, dressed in a suit of human ambition, woven from contracts, ambition, betrayal, raised his glass high. "My friends," he said, voice echoing from every wall, "one last toast." He drank, and the room pulsed with light. One by one, the guests were called. Not by name, but by memory. Caleb's widow was the first. Her body lifted into the air, limbs rigid, face blank. The green light flared, and she screamed. Her skin melted away in ribbons, revealing greed beneath. Gilded bones, hollow heart, ambition carved into her ribs. Then she was absorbed, sucked into the green light, her final thoughts exploding in colorless confetti across the ballroom. Next came the assistant. Then the banker. Then the art dealer. Each one disassembled. Each one fed the dream. They tried to run, but the doors led only to more rooms. The mansion rearranged itself, a shifting maze of velvet and bone. No exit, no salvation. Only Silas, smiling through tears, watching them fall. And then it was Lydia. He held her hand as the light reached for her, and for a moment he saw her as she once was, laughing, whole, free of him. She mouthed his name. And then she was gone. The green light swelled, bloated with the pain, the need, the essence of a generation of want. It became a vortex, swirling with the melted silhouettes of Wall Street, of celebrity, of failed gods and forgettable kings. It was beautiful. It was monstrous. And Silas knew what he had to do. He climbed the grand staircase, step by step, to the balcony that overlooked the ballroom, a throne built for sacrifice. There, he stood above them all. "My name was Silas Grey," he said. "But I was never just that. I was your ambition, your envy, your failure, dressed in victory's clothes." He looked at the green light, now pulsing like a womb ready to birth oblivion. No more. And he threw himself in. The light screamed. It shrieked like 1,000 markets crashing, like the last breath of the American century, like Gatsby choking on hope. The entire mansion shook. Rooms folded. Chandeliers shattered. The tendrils recoiled. Mirrors cracked, shattering 1,000 futures. For a heartbeat, a single, perfect instant, the dream hesitated. And then it laughed, not with joy, with inevitability. There is always another Gatsby. Time passed. The world blinked, and the mansion stood once more, freshly painted, perfectly restored. The gates were polished. The garden bloomed. A young family pulled up in a rental van, smiling wide, eager to begin their new chapter in life. The child stepped out first, a boy, no older than 10. He looked up at the house, eyes wide with wonder. And in the distance, just beyond the edge of the bay, a faint green glow flickered. Like a heartbeat, like a promise, like a curse. He smiled,